Hey sis, and welcome to another episode of the Balanced Woman podcast. I'm your host, Jess Lyles, a therapist and a routine coach. Today we're talking about something that I believe most of us have some experience with, that constant overwhelm, the emotional exhaustion, and the to-do list that just won't quit. Joining us today is Lindsay. She's a behavioral analyst, trauma specialist, children's author, and the founder of Bloom Behavioral Solutions. Lindsay works with children, teens, and young adults to help them reshape how they deal with emotions, behaviors, and stress. But don't get it twisted. This episode is not just for parents or for professionals. It's for you, sis, the one that's trying to keep it together while crumbling inside. Lindsay, welcome to the podcast. Me down. Lindsay, welcome. Thank you so much for joining the podcast. As we get started, I always love for our guest speaker to just give a little bit about themselves, a little bit about the work they do, kind of your elevator pitch, if you will.
All right, thank you for having me. I'm so excited for our conversation today. So my background is in behavior analysis. Shortly after, I also went to get a certified clinical trauma specialist certification, just connecting the trauma side to understanding behaviors, which I think was a key component that was missing within like the behavior analysis training and just understanding how the nervous system impacts our behaviors. It's not just a diagnosis, it's anybody. And then I started my own business in 2022. So Blossom Behavioral Solutions kind of stemmed from that to provide the behavior analysis services outside of the traditional approach like we might see in media, and just kind of where the ABA field is grounded based on, funding is ultimately what it
Right.
with insurance. I know you're a therapist and you
Yeah.
might work with insurance to understand that side of it. So it's a little bit different in behavior analysis. So I think that that can be a big barrier to the field and people understanding what we do or the core of it. And then shortly after as well, I think it was 2023, I launched the first book of the Adventures of Willow
Mhm.
series. Just launched book 2 last month, so that one's still very new, and a social emotional learning guide as well. So I wear all the hats, and really I'm just passionate about helping people grow and build the skill set that they need in order to blossom into their best self and succeed in life.
I love that. I love that. And for those of you guys listening, I had already told Lindsay offline that I have to get that book for my kiddos because I showed them like a little picture of it offline off your website this morning. And I was like, that's going to be a perfect gift in the Easter basket for this weekend. So I love it. Obviously, we're always going to be a little biased about our emotional health and our mental health. So hopefully these boys get a little regulated. But I'm going to segue here to our first question, Lindsay, because you already mentioned a little bit about the behavioral perspective that the world gets, but I want the real and true perspective on how women, especially women that are juggling a lot, how they can like manage their emotions and that internal chaos that they're experiencing when they're just going and the to-do list is just getting longer and longer. Like what can they actually do from that perspective, from the behavioral perspective?
Yeah, I think a lot of it stems down to self-care because if we're not taking the moment to pause and take care of ourselves, it's just going to be chaos, the internal chaos. It's just going to keep building up. We can put band-aids on things. We can take a moment to pause and doom scroll and avoid our feelings. But if we're not addressing it at the core, it's just going to keep piling up. And the more you let it pile up, that's where burnout hits. And many of us are managing so many different aspects, right? We have our home life to take care of, pets, kids, professional life, and that if we don't take that moment to pause and take care of ourselves, I see that that's where things start to fall. And a common misconception with behavior too is it has to be this big behavior like yelling or
Mm.
tantrum or hitting or something like that.
Yeah.
But behaviors are actions, and a lot of times we focus on negative behavior, but what about the positive behaviors? Going to the gym, engaging in self-care actions. Actions are behaviors. So I think that that can be a common misconception as well. So the more that we're addressing and moving and creating forward action in our life, I think that that is ultimately how we're going to achieve our goals, but it starts internal. If you're having self doubt, if you're having self criticism, that's all going to impact you moving forward in your life and your actions. So we really have to address those thoughts and those feelings and not get rid of them. We can't, right? We
Right.
can't get rid of them. It's about accepting, reframing, and being able to move forward.
Oh, you hit like the nail on the head when you said that it's about the positive actions that you do as well. Because I think when we start to think about overwhelm and burnout, usually we're overwhelmed because we're thinking about all the things that we haven't done or and all the things still left to do. What's one small thing that women, when they're, especially when they're overwhelmed, right, overstimulated, just going, that they can do for themselves, which might be a self care action, that can give them like a major impact to combat some of that overwhelm?
Think it ultimately is going to depend on you as an individual because what works for someone might be different than what works for somebody else. So
Right.
I'll tell that to a lot of the clients I work with. I'm going to give you tools, and if it doesn't work for you, that's okay. Let's try something different because what works for you might not work for somebody else, and vice versa. But being able to pause and recenter your focus into the present moment when we're in this internal chaos of go, 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 our to do list is 10 miles long because it's never ending. We're thinking of that in the long term. We
Yeah.
need to take our focus back to, okay, task one is what I can do. Break it down because even within one task, there's most of the time a lot of smaller actions within that. Maybe your task is, I need to clean the kitchen. Break it
Mhm.
down. I need to put the dishes in the dishwasher. I need to wipe off the counters. I need to clean the microwave. So, breaking it down can really help your brain recenter and focus on those small actions. Think of it like a stair step. The top of the stairs is your long term goal, whether kind of going back to cleaning the kitchen. Cleaning the kitchen is the top of the staircase. We have all of those small steps in order to get to the final product.
Mm. That's good. I'm thinking about myself. Because it's a good habit, but I have a habit of putting every little thing in my Google Calendar. That is how I survive, how I thrive. Um, but that's a part of how I know how much time a task even takes. So even it sounds like even the very thing that can help you regulate and kind of lower that overwhelm is the very thing you probably should have did in the first place, which is like be realistic with yourself on like the things that are taking up the most energy, taking up the most time, breaking them down. You also highlight on something important that often I forget as well, which is that the tasks that we identify as small have even smaller pieces. So, like cleaning the kitchen, we say it just like that. I have to go home and clean the kitchen. We don't break it down in the fact of like, I have to sweep them off the floor, I have to do the dishes, I have to clean out the fridge, I have to whatever. And for me, it's like even probably prepping food and stuff like that. But it all takes like energy and time. And so you see this little to-do list that says clean the kitchen and maybe like do the laundry, but really it's all those small things, excuse me, in between that kind of add up to it. Ooh.
Yeah, so we
Mm.
underestimate that time and we get to it and we're like, okay, I need to do these five things, but within that, there's so much more. We get to thing four, we're already burnt out, we're exhausted. We might critique ourselves that we didn't finish the rest of it, so we
Right.
fail at completing all our tasks for the day. So we have to learn how to have some flexibility within that as well.
Mm. So, okay, how would you encourage some women to be flexible in that? Because my husband and I were just talking about this last night, which is kind of funny. But we have one side of the spectrum where folks are extremely rigid, like to your point, like it's I have to get all these tasks done, no matter what I have to sacrifice in order to get it done. But then there's the other side of the spectrum of those folks who are giving themselves grace, but really it's a lot more than grace happening over there. Like it's just pretty much chilling, right? So like how flexible should they be to where they find that middle of the road for themselves?
I think that's going to depend on your mental capacity at the time, but
Right.
also able to identify, like, okay, I got three of the five done. My brain needs to rest because I need to prioritize that in order to move forward and complete everything else tomorrow. being able to prioritize like which have a higher priority and letting some of the ones go that don't necessarily need to be done in that moment but can wait. Finding ways to build in preferred activities while you're doing those maybe non-preferred tasks. Put on some music, let the stereo go up, and
Yes.
dance around while you're doing it, because if you're able to have fun with it a little bit, it's not going to feel as overwhelming at certain moments as well.
I like that. Ooh, this is funny. I do these episodes, and every time people say things, you sometimes don't realize the things you do that are helping yourselves until somebody just calls it back out to you. And I'm someone that I'm like pretty cliche, but I don't like folding my laundry. I never have. But I put on some music in the background, or I get the kids involved, and suddenly it's a little funner. I still don't like it, but it's a little fun and it gets done, right? To your point, like it's a box that gets checked off. I get my dopamine kick that I got something accomplished. I'm amazing. I'm a great person, and I get to move on. That's
Yeah.
good. I like
And I
that.
like that you brought up that you still don't like the task. And I think
Right.
that's important to recognize too. There's so many tasks that we do every day that we may not necessarily like, but accepting that, okay, I do have to get this done. I don't have to like it, but I can accept that that's a part of my routine and still find enjoyment and value in other activities. Like if you value keeping things clean, well, of course you're going to have to do a task that you may not like. But if you connect it to your long-term values of, I prefer a clean, tidy house, or I want to be able to have the outfit that I was looking forward to that was in the laundry,
Right.
you're able to connect that and hopefully use some internal motivation to get it done.
Yes. That's probably really what it is for me as well. And I can see that for other folks, especially women that fall in this category, because even if we kind of lack that for ourselves, usually we have little kiddos or folks that we're responsible for. So we also like kind of attach the value there. Like I'm a homemaker or I'm a mom or I'm something and that matters. And so because that matters and I'm valued that, I need to get these things done. It's almost
Yes.
like work too. Like I always tell people, I like to eat, so I have to work. I love people, so I have to do this type of work. I love this, so I have to like. That's a good call out on how you could tie those things in, especially when like the motivation is low, but the overwhelm is high, and like really trying to balance yourself back out. Oh,
Yes. And sometimes it's hard to even connect to the long term as well, because in the
yeah,
short term, we think of it's easier to avoid because then I get to still do this and I avoid doing that, but then we miss those long term consequences. So being able to work with your brain on like, what are the long term consequences if I sit and avoid this now? And is it worth it? And I know working just even with kids and adolescents, it's a little bit harder for them to be able to connect, especially
yeah,
if we have our neurodivergent brain working with us as well. It's
yeah,
easier to be like short term, let's do this, but long term it comes around and you're like, oh man, like I really should have gotten that done before.
yeah. Now it's killing me. Legitimately, whether it's stress or whatever else. You're already tiptoeing in this ring, so I'm gonna just go ahead and pull it out. You do ACT work. Like I saw it on your website, I saw it in a lot of the content that you have. For anybody that's never heard of ACT before in that therapeutic style, how would you explain that to them? Like, I'm your first client, I'm here, I could benefit from it. How do you explain that to them, and how is it beneficial for someone in that bucket, so to speak, that overwhelmed, overstimulated bucket?
hmm That's a good question. So, breaking it down, so ACT is acceptance and commitment therapy. And from the behavior analytic standpoint, I take that behavior analytic approach. What happens before the behavior and then the consequences of it, and that internal motivation approach as well. So, acceptance. There's within our mind those internal events, those external events, being able to create that acceptance within what we're doing versus that avoidance. And that acceptance can help us move in a forward action or our committed actions. Those are the behaviors that we're doing every day, are those committed actions. But connecting those committed actions or everyday tasks to things that are valuable for us, and
Mm.
how we can then learn how to manage those internal thoughts or chaos, like we kind of talked about at the beginning,
Right.
accept and diffuse some of that to make it feel lighter instead of thinking of like a rock. Sometimes those thoughts feel like we're being weighed down by a rock. So being able to implement some strategies to make it feel lighter, it's not getting rid of it, but it's changing the intensity of how we feel it to be able to move forward in a committed way towards our ultimate like outcome or our ultimate goal versus moving backwards or away from that.
Mm, that's so uncomfortable. Like I'm I always like to say that I try to put myself in like my client's shoes. And so I know we always call it out that like, hey, I need you to bear with me. I need you to stay with me in this. But for those of you that are like for the individuals that are just listening, right? They're not in our therapeutic seats or they're not getting coaching from us. How would you encourage them to lean into that discomfort to get that stuff done?
Say baby steps. It's
Yeah.
setting small, attainable goals. You could have these long term goals, but maybe step one is just getting started, showing up for yourself, doing one small, simple thing that you know that you can achieve. Because if you set the criteria too high, let's use maybe you value health and wellness and you want to start going to the gym. So if you set the goal of I need to be in the gym every day for an hour each day, is that realistic if you are not even making it one day? So being able to set that of, hey, I'm going to go 3 times this week for 30 minutes. You meet that, then you start to increase it because you're getting those dopamine hits for meeting your goals and you're less likely to have those thoughts of like, I'm a failure, I didn't meet my goals, I'm going to give up. Hey, I met this, I'm going to keep pushing myself forward because now I feel motivated.
That's good. That leads me into the folks that I like to call my cousins because I struggle with this historically, which is perfectionism. So even when we start with like those small steps of like, I'm going to go to the gym one time for an hour, my brain is like, if it didn't happen, if I didn't stay for exactly 60 minutes, it was a loss, right? Just like completely diminishing the fact that like I went for 30 minutes or 45 even, or like I actually got in the car and drove over there, whatever, like all those small steps that you're mentioning, we look over those so often and we just go, I didn't do it. It didn't happen. And so it like kills your motivation to continue to do it. And you're like, I leaned in, I tried, didn't work, because that perfectionism in you is like, it didn't happen the exact way you said it was going to happen. And so there are times where that voice, as I like to call it, that part of yourself comes up and she shows up in the perfect time, right? Like going to the gym in general, I need to do that perfectly. That's awesome. But going to the gym for at least an hour, and if I only did 50 minutes, I'm like, how can I make this up? Or what happened? Like how would you encourage people to kind of have some like self-compassion in that moment and to continue on because you did some small steps?
That's where that acceptance and flexibility come in. So if you're
Hmm.
so rigid on it has to be 60 minutes and then you're getting down on yourself, but you stayed for 30, 45 minutes, 50 minutes, and you still showed up, it's being able to acknowledge that that's where your mind went is that, I didn't meet the 60 minutes, I'm struggling, I'm not perfect in that moment, and reframing that to I showed up. So acknowledging and validating yourself for those small actions and trying to shift and outweigh some of those negative thoughts that pop up because we can't always get rid of them. They just pop up. We don't always have control if they do, but it's how you shift away from it. Because if you're so focused on trying to get rid of those thoughts, it's like, have you ever tried to? I know you have kids, so I don't know if they've done this, but in the pool, you have a beach ball and you're
Yeah.
trying to shove it down. What happens if you're trying to shove it down too much?
It's like
It
popping back
pops up
up.
and
It's the pressure. Yeah.
Mhm. So if you're thinking of that, like, I got to get rid of this, I got to get rid of this thought, I can't think this, it's all just going to pop back up in your face
Mm.
versus, okay, I accept that this thought popped up. I'm going to let it go. And now I'm going to focus my attention to this other thought over here. That's a little bit more helpful to me to reach my goals. And that's, I showed up and I'm going to come again tomorrow.
Like I'm gonna steal that visual. I'm like, I'm over here like, okay, she said this and then that. I'm gonna stick it in my back pocket because that was like I imagined it for myself, and we all pretty much knows what happened when you're pushing that ball down, you're applying pressure, and you got the pressure coming up from underneath. And I feel like that's how people get stuck in that trap, that thought cycle. And you also said something that I think a lot of people don't accept, which is that those thoughts are going to come up sometimes. Like a lot of people feel like they aren't improving or they haven't healed or they're not healthy because sometimes those negative thoughts come up or those doubtful thoughts come up instead of just remembering that no, I just built skills in order to combat those thoughts or reshape my mindset on things. How can individuals stay encouraged through that piece? We're like, man, I'm like still having these like negative thoughts every time I'm trying to just get stuff done, or the endless to-do list, to going to the gym, whichever example you want to use. Like those negative thoughts just keep coming up. How do I like stay motivated, stay in tuned in those moments?
Say for the motivation, knowing that you're not alone, because oftentimes we might feel like we're alone because we're experiencing these negative thoughts. No one else is acting like this, they're showing up. But we have to remember those thoughts, unless you vocally express them, like, we're talking, we're vocally expressing these
Right.
thoughts or writing them down, because that's another form of, communication and expression. um, you can't see what someone else is thinking, right? I
Mm,
don't know what your thoughts were before we jumped on this call, if you were feeling nervous or you felt like you had to be a certain way for the podcast, right?
yeah.
So if we feel like we're alone in this and that nobody else is feeling these negative thoughts, then that kind of beats us down even more. So recognizing, hey, we're not alone. I just can't see what somebody else is thinking, but I can only control me and how I shift forward. So being able to stay motivated of it's not going to change overnight, but over time it's gradual. It's going to start to get easier. I guess we're using metaphors, right? Think of it like a
Yeah.
mountain, right? Or
Yeah.
stocks, same thing. So its growth is not linear. It's not just going to change quickly. We're going to have setbacks. We're going to have days where, those negative thoughts might be getting the best of us even more, but it's remembering how we can still come out of it and move forward in a better way than we may have in the past.
I like that. So I feel like this whole bit essentially is like heavy on like the rigid folks that need to give themselves grace. What about the people who are very graceful? As I like to say, they're extremely flexible and they need some boundaries with themselves to make sure that they're not going overboard. So, like, they're not getting to the point where they're over functioning, but
Mhm.
they're also not under functioning, which I think, I hate to say this, but I feel like, like in the media, so to speak, a lot of people have said, like, how younger generations are so soft and everything. I respectfully disagree because I feel like they're just healthy. But there are folks in every generation who are too graceful, who are
Mhm.
motivated to not do in order to just completely avoid the stress and avoid the burnout because they can only do one or other, right? So all the black and white thinking. How can they set boundaries with themselves to not overfunction, but really meet themselves in the middle there so they are getting things done?
That's a good question. And I think it's starting with small, attainable goals, kind of even driving it back to where we talked about going to the gym.
Hmm.
Whatever those tasks are that you need to do each day, start with a small, attainable goal. If you're just used to not acting on the things that you need to do, or maybe sitting and doom scrolling, what is one thing that you can accomplish that day? You're getting those dopamine hits, you're building it up after that. Um, and knowing and trying to think of what are the long-term goals, which can be hard. We don't want to stay so stuck in like the past or the future, but
Right.
connecting, what can I do right now in this moment, to feel accomplished and get this one goal done? Write it out, write a list of the things that you might need to do, but or start with writing that one thing down, getting up, crossing that off the list, get up, do another one, versus writing your whole list and you feel so overwhelmed because you have 20 things on your list and you have a hard time getting started. Call a friend, ask a friend to sit on the phone with you and talk while you do it, if depending on what the task is, because sometimes body doubling can be very helpful. So it's you guys are doing a task to hold each other accountable, but you might be doing separate tasks in the same room together. So relying on others for support can be helpful until you can find that internal motivation.
Mhm. I like that one. Again, I'm thinking about like how I do that very thing without really giving myself credit for it. But I think that actually prompts a question for me is once you find the balance, like you're not under or over anymore, you're pretty consistent, right? We have moments where we teeter, but you found the balance. You're good. You're not as overwhelmed as often.
Yes.
How can you actually give yourself like kind of some gratitude in those moments with like expression of where you are. I think for the most part, through my involvement, through my journey and everything, I've gotten pretty good at all the rest. But with appreciating where I am now, how would you suggest or encourage individuals to really be present in that moment?
I think it's shaping those thoughts, validating yourself, reinforcing yourself, those positive affirmations like, hey, I did this. I was able to do this. 6 months ago, I may not have been able to.
Oh,
And
yeah,
I know you mentioned, like, it seems like, you're making that forward movement, but there's still going to be days where you might feel like you're not. It's
right.
not all have it together every single day. So having grace in those moments as well. Like, hey, it's okay that I needed to rest today because I wasn't feeling well. Tomorrow is when I'm going to move that energy forward, because if our bodies are not feeling good as a whole from the root, moving
Hmm.
forward and trying to act on these things is not going to be always very helpful. So we
Yeah.
have to take care of our body as a core and validate that and give grace with some of that.
That's good. That's really good. I'm over here thinking about I probably don't do that as much. I think I do a pretty decent job of like, hey, you were sick. It's okay that like this was the to-do list today was to rest, to take care of yourself. And like you balanced it out the rest of the week because like you really hit the ground running. But definitely the affirmations. It's funny. It's always the simplest things. I think especially as therapists, we get to learn all these like different modalities and different ways of doing things. And as coaches too, we hear all these like deep, life-changing stories. And so it makes us apply very intense techniques and teach skill sets that sometimes I forget about, like, oh yeah, affirmations, I haven't done that in a while. But like, hey, sitting and doing a deep meditation for like 30 minutes, no problem. Affirmations right over my head. I'm sitting over here and I'm cracking myself up because I'm just like, these are things that like we were like me. I think we learned them before we even got out of grad school, like though that was kind of where you start as well too. And I think that it just further encourages the tip essentially that you've continuously gave, but just like start small, no matter where you are. Identify where you want to go and start small because usually it's those small things that really set you up for success in the end.
Yeah. And even like sometimes I feel like people think therapists have it all together and they can implement all these skills at any given moment, but it's not always true. Sometimes
Mhm.
I struggle and I doom scroll and it's hard to get started, but it's still implementing it to move forward in forward action.
That's right. Oh man, Lindsay. Okay, so I have a segment of the podcast where I always love to ask our guests, what is one key takeaway that you would love for our listeners to leave this episode with? If they didn't pay attention to anything else, this is their moment. What should they listen to?
I think you've got it. You are in control of your actions. Nobody else can control you moving forward. So I think being able to find what's valuable to you, connecting it to those long term goals, and taking those small, attainable steps to set you up for success. Because if your goals are too broad, too complex, you're going to feel defeated.
Hmm.
Working on accepting those thoughts and feelings that may arise and being able to let them go or just set them aside and shift your focus to something that's going to help move you towards a forward action and taking care of yourself. Self care.
Love that. I'll even love that self care has gotten so big lately too, because I'm like, it's at least with the individuals I work with, it's gotten a lot easier to say, so we know what we need to do, right? Like it's like you do your self care, and now the conversation has even shifted to instead of like what self care is and what you can do about it, so what did you do for self care? I can go right there now because it's been so mainstream. Lindsay, this was so good. Thank you again so much for coming to the podcast. Please tell my listeners where they could find you, where they could follow what's next for you, and also where they could purchase your books.
Perfect. Thank you for having me. So you can find me in lots of different places. So I have just as the business owner and wearing all the different hats, we have the Adventures of Willow series, which is the book that has a separate Instagram. You can purchase the book on my website, blossombehavioralsolutions.com, or on Amazon. It's there as well, just for increased access. I also do have the social emotional learning guide. The PDF can be purchased on my website, or a paperback can be purchased on Amazon. For coaching content, I would go to the Mindful Behaviorist and follow along on the website. You can subscribe on the website, Blossom Behavioral Solutions, and you'll be able to have first access to upcoming groups, upcoming coaching, upcoming just anything that the business is taking us in the next few months, because there's a lot coming for us.
That's awesome. We caught you at the beginning of the year, so now we can like track everything, follow everything, get the new book, give all our feedback, make sure everybody leaves comments on Amazon. I know I have a lot of Amazon girlies, so making sure you guys leave a lot of feedback because that boosts things up as well for Lindsay because we want to have emotionally regulated babies, and which naturally makes emotionally regulated parents, in my opinion. But thank you so much, Lindsay. I will make sure everything is linked below for our listeners. Sis, if you've been feeling like you've been carrying the weight of the world and still not doing enough, this is your reminder. How you think, how you feel, how you talk to yourself matters. And you're allowed to release the pressure. You're allowed to reframe your thoughts. And you deserve a life that is calm, but still aligns with your values. Be sure to connect with Lindsay on her social media, follow her. Also reach out if you're in any need of her services. What a treat. Lindsay, thank you so much again for joining the podcast. And remember, sis, balance is not something you find, it's something you create. Until next time.